October 8, 1982. Early morning. State Route 198 and 19th Avenue near Lemoore, California, became the site of a major tragedy. A car stalled while crossing the westbound lanes, partially blocking traffic. As a westbound cab-over engine truck approached, the driver swerved left and braked to avoid the stalled car, then continued through the intersection into the eastbound curb lane. Then, a head-on collision. The other vehicle, an eastbound church van. 9 of the van's 11 occupants perished at the scene. The 10th passenger died 3 days later, and 1 passenger sustained minor injuries. The truck driver was seriously injured. This tragic accident happened to coincide with the fall of cab-over engine trucks. Of course, tragedies, even disastrous ones, happen all the time. This single crash should not be the lens through which to view the whole industry. After all, just 2 decades earlier, in the 1960s and 1970s, cab-over trucks were a common sight in the United States. A staple of heavy transport, they accounted for around half and sometimes more of new Class 8 tractor sales in the U.S. This was the peak of their reign. No less than tens of thousands of them dotted the roads all over the country. But then, they disappeared. So why did America stop making cab-over trucks? To answer this, we need to dive further back through history lane. World War II is over. The realities in the U.S. and Europe were changing fast. After 1945, economies were booming. This meant that freight demand was also exploding. Thus, cab-overs became a practical solution to very real problems of that era. The late 1940s through the 1970s saw the United States undergo a massive industrial expansion, suburban growth, and rising consumer demand. Freight had to move in greater volumes and often into newly expanding urban areas. But regulations at the time capped total vehicle length at 65 feet. This meant that if a truck's tractor was long, the trailer had to be shorter. Flat-fronted, boxy tractor, 8 to 9 feet tall, 7 to 8 feet wide, and 20 to 25 feet long for the tractor unit alone. Cab-overs solved that problem perfectly by cutting down tractor length, allowing companies to pull longer trailers within the same legal limit. More cargo per trip, lower cost, higher profits. At the same time, U.S. cities were growing congested. Cab-overs could usually navigate urban centers far better than long-nosed conventionals of the era. During the 1960s and 1970s, cab-over engine trucks reached the height of their popularity in the United States. Their compact design offered a crucial advantage by allowing carriers to maximize trailer length without exceeding the legal limits. This made them especially common in regions with strict enforcement, such as California and the Northeast. Manufacturers responded to this demand with a wide range of models. International Harvester produced the TransStar CO 4070, one of the most recognizable cab-overs of the era. While White Motor Company offered its Road Boss COE, Max F-Series, Kensworth K100, and Peterbilt's 352 became staples on American highways. However, despite their commercial success, drivers often found them uncomfortable. With the engine directly beneath the cab, cab-over engine trucks generated significant heat, noise, and vibration. Rides were rougher due to shorter wheelbases, but the ability to haul longer trailers ensured their continued use throughout the peak years. But then, the freight industry in the United States changed forever. The 1970s were a time of great transformation. The interstate highway system, launched in 1956 under President Dwight D. Eisenhower's Federal Aid Highway Act, was nearing completion after 2 decades of massive construction. With more than 40,000 miles of road laid down by the end of the decade, the system provided straighter, wider, and stronger highways that stretched from coast to coast. This fundamentally changed the logistics of freight hauling. Trucks were no longer confined to slower U.S. highways and state routes with sharp curves and narrow bridges. Instead, they could traverse long distances with fewer stops, fewer steep grades, and a higher degree of safety. This removed many of the practical limitations that had made compact cab-over engine trucks indispensable in earlier decades. As highways modernized, pressure mounted from the trucking industry. The link laws that counted both the tractor and trailer toward a vehicle's maximum length now seemed outdated. Organizations such as the American Trucking Association, or ATA, representing carriers nationwide, argued that these rules were cutting into efficiency. Timing was also crucial. You see, back in October 1973, members of the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OAPEC, imposed an oil embargo in response to U.S. support for Israel. Crude oil prices quadrupled almost overnight, raising from around $3 per barrel in 1972 to almost $12 by 1974. For the American trucking industry, operating costs skyrocketed. As diesel prices rose by more than 50% within months, many independent truckers were forced to idle their rigs. Nationwide, freight volumes dipped as consumers curtailed spending and manufacturers faced higher transport costs. By the mid-1970s, trucks already moved more than 60% of the nation's freight by value, surpassing railroads in flexibility and reach. But high fuel prices and shortages led to driver protests, including strikes in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio in late 1973 and early 1974, where independent operators blocked highways demanding fuel price caps and fairer freight rates. The federal government responded with temporary speed limits to conserve fuel. For truckers, this reduced their ability to cover long distances efficiently. Despite these short-term disruptions, trucking industry emerged stronger in the late 1970s as fuel supplies stabilized and the U.S. economy shifted gears. By 1977, GDP growth rebounded to 4.6%, and the freight demand surged with renewed consumer spending. Truck manufacturers, including Kenworth, Peterbilt, Mack, and International Harvester, joined with carriers in lobbying for standardized length regulations that would allow them to design longer, more comfortable tractors without sacrificing trailer space. The limitations of cab-over trucks had become clearer. Long-haul runs were now more frequent, covering thousands of miles on interstates built to handle larger rigs. Drivers, already strained by the fuel crisis years, pushed for more comfortable tractors to cope with extended hours on the road. By the early 1980s, truckers were covering an average of 120,000 miles per year. Coast-to-coast journeys lasted days at a stretch. In cab-over trucks, the cramped interiors, noisy cabins, and constant vibrations made these trips grueling. Sleeper berths were small, often little more than narrow bunks wedged behind the driver's seat, and the ride itself was punishing because of the shorter wheelbase. Truckers began voicing their desire for more comfortable conditions on the road. Manufacturers saw this as an opportunity. The turning point arrived with the passage of the Surface Transportation Assistance Act, or STAA, of 1982. Signed into law by President Ronald Reagan on January 6, 1983, this legislation was a watershed for the trucking industry. One of its key provisions was the standardization of truck and trailer size regulations across all states. The act established a federal minimum of 48 feet for trailer length, ensuring carriers could operate across state lines without facing inconsistent restrictions. The STAA also removed the tractor from the overall length calculation. Freed from the need to minimize tractor length, manufacturers quickly pivoted to designing longer, conventional-style trucks. By the mid-1980s, tractors with extended hoods, larger wheelbases, and spacious sleepers were flooding the market. Drivers embraced them. In 1980, cab-over engine trucks accounted for nearly 50% of the new Class 8 tractor sales in the U.S., especially in states like California, where the old 55-foot overall limit had been enforced. But by 1985, conventionals had surged to about 70% of the market. COE sales had fallen below 30%. By the early 1990s, conventionals dominated almost completely, with cab-over engine trucks making up less than 10% of heavy-duty sales in North America. Conventional tractors could now run with 48-foot trailers and later 53-foot after 1991 updates, while offering more comfort. Manufacturers responded with models such as the Kenworth W900B, Peterbilt 379, and the Freightliner FLD 120. all of which offered wheelbase exceeding 250 inches and sleeper cabs measuring 60 to 70 inches deep, compared to the cramped 36-inch bunks typical in cabovers. Drivers, many of whom were logging 100 to 120,000 miles per year on cross-country routes, overwhelmingly preferred conventionals. Surveys in Overdrive magazine during the mid-1980s reported that more than 80% of long-haul drivers favored conventional trucks. Better ride quality, noise reduction, more sleeper space, all the things that long-haul drivers had dreamt of for decades. Maintenance crews also benefited since engine access on conventional trucks was far easier than on cabovers, which required the entire cab to tilt forward. By 1986, some large fleets such as Schneider National and J.B. Hunt had begun retiring their cab-over engine fleets in favor of conventional trucks. The STAA also indirectly improved safety. In the event of a collision, a conventional tractor provides several feet of engine compartment and frame as a buffer between the driver and impact. Cabover, in contrast, placed the driver almost directly over the front axle. Only a windshield separated them from oncoming vehicles. The difference in safety became all too apparent on the evening of June 21, 1985, when a refrigerated semi-trailer cab-over engine truck lost its brakes and plunged down a steep section known as the Longtown Hill in Van Buren. Loaded with approximately 72,000 pounds of frozen pork, the truck rammed into a packed station wagon and drove it through a guardrail into several downtown buildings. A devastating fire ignited. The crash tragically killed all 9 occupants, the truck driver and passenger, plus all 7 people in the station wagon. This was not an anomaly, but part of a broader trend. By the late 1980s, driver fatality rates per 100 million miles driven in cab-over engine trucks were 15 to 20% higher than in conventional tractors. Frontal collisions like this one accounted for the majority of the difference. What had once been a symbol of efficiency had now become a compromise in safety. Over the following years, the federal government further relaxed trailer length rules. By the mid-1990s, cab-over engine trucks survived in the U.S. primarily in specialty niches. Their compact design still offered superior maneuverability. Refuse collection fleets favored cab-over engine trucks for their ability to navigate tight urban streets and allowed drivers to exit and enter the cab frequently. Similarly, fire apparatus manufacturers like Pierce and E1 continue to build cab-over engine style fire trucks because the cab-over configuration allowed for more space behind the cab for pumps and equipment. Local delivery fleets, especially in dense metropolitan areas such as New York City and Chicago, also retained cab-over engine trucks for box trucks and beverage delivery vehicles. However, this was only a fraction of the heavy-duty market compared to the long-haul segment. The United States had entered a new era, and the cab-over engine trucks were no longer relevant. However, in Europe, Japan, and parts of Asia, cab-over engine trucks remained dominant well into the 1990s and beyond. Largely because of road conditions and regulatory differences, European Union rules impose strict overall length limits. Narrower streets and older infrastructure in cities like London, Paris, and Tokyo also made cab-over engine trucks far more practical than conventional trucks. Manufacturers such as Scania, MAN, Volvo, and Hino continued to refine cab-over engine designs with advances in aerodynamics and driver comfort, keeping them competitive internationally. By the 2000s, American trucking culture had decisively embraced the long-nose conventional. The aerodynamic revolution, spearheaded by trucks like the Freightliner Century class and later the Cascadia in 2007, reinforced this preference. Even as the industry entered the age of alternative fuels and electrification, the long hood silhouette persisted. As with all good things, the cab-over engine trucks were simply replaced by something better.